Good morning. Thank you to Jackie and Chair Valentine for kicking off our day. I want to extend a big thank you to the South Bay COG staff for their tireless work on putting this event together, to the Vertical Group for helping us navigate a virtual environment, our sponsors for helping make today and all our past General Assemblies a reality, and of course you, the audience, for investing the time to be here with us. 1 year ago, we planned to have, for the most part, this same General Assembly, and then COVID-19 in rapid order forced us to cancel. So here we are, a year later, and the theme of intersections feels even more apropos. You may ask why. Well, one of the earliest things I recognized as a local elected official was the fact that while we in government try our best to address and solve issues in a host of arenas, we can many times approach solutions in a siloed perspective. But the reality is that there are multiple natural intersections in ways these various sectors and issues overlap. If we fail to recognize the delicate balance between them, we run the risk of creating unintended consequences and/or future problems. So today, we will be hearing from a variety of speakers to discuss their unique perspectives and ideas addressing transportation and mobility, housing and homelessness, public safety, public health, sustainability, technology, and economic development. We will then have 3 panels. The first will explore the natural intersections between our morning speakers' areas of expertise. The second will cover the intersections between the public and private sectors, and we will close out our day exploring the delicate intersection between state and local governments. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Intersections. Our first speaker is based out of Cal State Long Beach. Dr. Tom O'Brien serves as the Executive Director for the Center for International Trade and Transportation. Please give him a warm virtual welcome.
Hello, I'm Tom O'Brien, the Executive Director of the Center for International Trade and Transportation at California State University, Long Beach. And I want to thank the South Bay City's COG for inviting me here today to talk about the intersection of trade, transportation, the future of mobility, and the workforce. This is a topic that is, I think, important for this discussion of intersections. One, because transport is central to economic life in our region, in the South Bay in particular. It's also important to the state and the nation. On top of it, the pandemic has revealed challenges and opportunities related to mobility. The demands, for example, of office space impacting future transport patterns, but it's also revealed some possible challenges in the future of work and the security of work in a new environment. I want to start by talking briefly about the future of mobility, and then we'll talk a little bit about the future of work. The future of mobility, I think, is both machine-centric and human-centric. It involves technological advancements impacting traditional modes of transport, but it also includes advanced technologies that create new opportunities that haven't yet existed through augmented reality, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. And I think as well that the impacts are going to be felt globally. Global trade is important to us here because of our port sector, but it also affects local policy-making decisions about the relationship between e-commerce, for example, and the use of streetscape for everyone else. Yesterday's Tomorrows, right, is actually a book and an exhibit that LACMA hosted in the 1990s. And I share these images with you as a reminder that we've always tried to envision what our future would look like. And it often includes a transport future that is clean and fast and connects people to where they live, where they work, and where they play. And at the heart of all of this is an environment that is sometimes bucolic, sometimes frenetic, but always incorporates the way we move both people and goods. And that's no different than the futures that we look at today. The difference, though, is that today's tomorrows, as opposed to yesterday's tomorrows, appear much closer on the horizon. And that's because of the rapid change and advancement of technologies. So while some of these technologies like self-driving cars and drones are not yet in widespread use, perhaps, we know that they're coming. But what does this mean then for the future of work? Well, I think there will be changes in how we learn, what we learn, and why we learn it. Part of this is going to require some changes for us in the academy in what we teach and how. The traditional academic ladder that takes people from an entry-level position and helps them develop skills for lifelong work, particularly if possible in a single occupation, is not going to be the case anymore. As a start, we're going to have to be looking at how industry certifications can be embedded into our traditional degree programs, for example, because they will be demanded by employers, and students will view it as, you know, for want of a better term, currency on the job market. The other thing that I think students are going to have to realize, and this gets to the point of the right-hand side, is that they're going to have multiple on-ramps and off-ramps to get to their end goal, the desired job, whatever it might be. And it's not going to be a traditional linear path. It's going to be circuitous. It's going to be requiring the development of different types of skills at different stages of life and career. We're going to define employability differently. This comes from research that we did looking at employers' needs in the Southern California logistics sector. And what is most interesting, I think, about this is that the job-specific skills are ones that in many cases employers think they can teach on the job. What they're interested in are things like critical thinking, communications and interpersonal skills, collaboration and teamwork, customer service, adaptability and resilience, which I think speaks volumes about what the workforce is like today. And then I'll call out digital literacy, because that was stressed in many different ways at all levels, at the entry level with knowledge of what we might consider basic computer skills, up to the ability to incorporate advanced technology into the workplace. And this is going to, these changes are going to be felt economy-wide, but I think in particular, for at least for our discussion, in the transport and mobility workforce. And I think we can say everything old is new again, right? As I mentioned earlier, this is something that's not a new phenomenon. But what is new is the acute nature of the problem and the speed with which we're having to adapt, right? And the challenge of preparing for workplaces and occupations that don't even exist yet. New types of technicians that we're just learning about on the workplace, and we are having to be nimble and agile in response in developing those programs. The interdisciplinary nature of the work. It's no longer, at least in the transport sector, good enough to know about transportation. In a world where the state creates mandates for transition to zero emission technology, the transport worker has to understand energy systems, the life of a battery, the role played by a public utilities commission. That's all important. And therefore, those foundational skills that I referenced in the slide before, the critical thinking, the adaptability and resilience, become part of the student's core learning and an expectation that the employer has for what a strong candidate will bring to the workplace. On the demand side, on the student side, they're increasingly concerned with the cost of education, and from what we can tell in our programs, looking for a more menu-driven approach that allows them to design their own program that reflects their future hopes and what they see as the reality of the workplace. Part of that is going to require us redefining what a transport occupation is, right? The largest in-demand occupation still in transport is the driver, the bus driver, the truck driver in particular. What does that look like? And is there an opportunity for that person in a future where the transport may be automated in nature? And I think the answer is yes, if we can show some own adaptability and resiliency on our end in the training and education field. This to me is an important slide because it shows what I hope in many ways will be the future. One that includes technology and humans side by side in the same workplace. This again is a reference to my early point, a machine-centric and a human-centric world. This is a dock worker alongside an automated guided vehicle at a port, and a distribution and warehouse worker working with robotics. The fact is that part of the question is, in fact, and I'm not naive about this, labor saving and the role that technology plays in efficiency, but also the need for people to manage and understand the work processes, to plan for adjustments, to read and use the data that's being generated by information technology, and to give meaning to data, right? This is on the left-hand side a screenshot from a crowdsourcing program that truck drivers use to share information on available truck spaces. Well, the human part of this is, what do you do with the data to help design policies that don't require truck drivers to stop alongside of the freeway? How do you make land use decisions about where to put truck stops? On the right, it's the potential application of blockchain in the transport sector. And all of these different layers of data, including dealing with privacy, managing contracts and communications, have a human interface as well. So then I think the final question is how do we prepare and engage people for the future of transport? I think the first question is, or the first step is questioning your assumptions. If the assumption is that technology eliminates all jobs, again, I don't want to be naive, but is that in fact the case? It might appear counterintuitive, but this is a page from North America's first autonomous truck driving certificate program. This comes out of Arizona, and these are students who hold commercial driver's licenses being trained to work in the cab of automated trucks, where the job function has shifted to diagnostics, to system override, but knowing the road helps tremendously in this area. Similarly, the transition to zero-emission fleets means new opportunities for the design and maintenance of not only the vehicles themselves, but the infrastructure, right? And we have a very innovative program in California, the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program, which has been a partnership of the state through the California Energy Commission, trade unions, private sectors, and equipment OEMs, the equipment manufacturers. The other thing I think we need to be prepared for is to embrace lifelong learning. Increasingly, we're seeing opportunities and the need to introduce these the questions of technology into the high schools and even middle schools. The bottom center picture is of high school students at a trade association meeting in Long Beach. On the upper left-hand side, you may notice some of your colleagues in the South Bay cities who were part of a training program that we offered, looking at how do you plan for conflicted use of the curb when you have freight, e-commerce, passenger vehicles, bikes, pedestrians, all wanting to use the same space. And these were students, quote unquote, undertaking a task walk audit to better understand the environment and how they could respond from a policy perspective. But this suggests we need to change the way we think about how we learn, what we learn, and when we learn. And then finally, I'll close with a call to action to prepare to learn new things. This is a job posting for a terminal manager, something that we might see here in Southern California. And I think it combines in a nice way and depicts this intersection of technical skills, job-specific skills, and the need to be ready to prepare for knowledge of not only transport, but health, safety, and environmental regulations, proficiency with the data management tools from Microsoft Excel on up, and the ability to effectively communicate in the arena of human resource management so that the people understand both the human nature and the technological nature. And with that, I'm going to close. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to getting your questions and comments.
Thank you, Tom. I've known our next speaker for almost 20 years. She has been a leader on the forefront of emergency medicine and pediatric emergency medicine, and now serves as the medical director for LA County's EMS agency. Please welcome Dr. Marianne Gauche-Hill.
Hi there, my name is Dr. Marianne Gauche-Hill. I'm the medical director for the Los Angeles County EMS agency, and it's my pleasure to join you today to talk about our collaborative response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Here we go. The title of my comments today are Collaboration of Emergency Medical Services and Public Health in Response to the Pandemic. I think it's very important to understand that a collaborative response and coordination was absolutely necessary in order to meet the needs of the public during the pandemic. First, I want to tell you a little bit about emergency medical services. When you think of pre-hospital care, this is what you think about, right? Ambulances, helicopters, EMTs and paramedics coming to the scene of accidents or serious illness or injuries such as stroke and heart attacks. Just to frame things a bit, Los Angeles, it's a complex healthcare system. It's one of the largest emergency medical systems in the world and was one of the first to be developed in 1969. We have a huge workforce with over 12,000 individuals serving either as paramedics, EMTs, or mobile intensive care nurses that actually provide online medical direction. In addition, we have physicians and nurses that work at our 70 acute care receiving facilities. Just to say that these individuals will transport patients to our receiving centers, and we have a wide array of services that are available in a regionalized emergency medical services system. So just to provide a bit of structure and framing the complexity of our healthcare system. When COVID-19 hit, we all had to transition from what we do from day to day to disaster management. The impact not only was on us as a system, but also on us as individuals and healthcare workers. As someone who's an emergency medicine physician, I switched from the way I see patients to seeing patients in full PPE. It was a transition for all of us. I thought I would frame some of our response based on an anatomy of pandemic response. So there's many things that we have to think about. Declaration, collaboration, and coordination, collection of data, communication, innovation, allocation and distribution of PPE, we'll talk about that in therapeutics, vaccination, and then finally evaluation. First of all, there needed to be a declaration on March 4th, 2020. The mayor declared a public health emergency. So did the governor and the president of the United States. So at that point, we were all in. We stood up multiple disaster operations centers around LA County, and the various agencies that we collaborated and coordinated with throughout this pandemic response were up and running, and we begun the task of meeting the needs of the public, facing the pandemic head on, and beginning to develop strategies that would help keep us safe. These are the organizations that we have worked with: the Office of Emergency Management, Hospital Association of Southern California, our state EMS authority, which has been instrumental along with California Department of Public Health in communicating with our federal partners and bringing us therapeutics and personal protective equipment, or PPE. Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, of course, and our agency. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our LA area fire chiefs, who were instrumental in terms of standing up testing centers, as well as now manning vaccine vaccination centers and megapods. They have been absolutely a critical partner in this, as well as our federal partners. The USNS Mercy came early on during the pandemic to help us offload our hospitals for non-COVID patients, as well as providing personnel that went to a number of our acute care hospitals, as well as skilled nursing facilities. In addition, we had the California National Guard, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers here to help us. Some of the innovation, which I'll get to in the next slide a bit, is Operation Warp Speed, which, as you know, has brought vaccines, and that public-private partnership has brought wonderful strategies and therapeutics to us. In order to help guide us throughout this, we had to collect data. And this turned out to be absolutely critical in order to anticipate what was coming. And as you can see in this graph, you see the initial, over here was the initial wave, but then in the summer in July, and then this huge surge that we just experienced over Christmas and New Year's. Understanding that we were in this portion of the curve was absolutely critical for us to work with hospitals and all of our stakeholders to meet the needs. In addition, we have a medical alert center, which operates 24/7, who's able to collect data, help provide transfers, and give us the information we need from a regional planning perspective. On this graph, this is a diversion report, and you can see almost all of the hospitals at this time period during our huge surge were on ALS diversion. What that means is everybody was open, basically. But in addition, we were able to utilize data from this in various regions of the county to plan and work with hospitals to keep services open so that they would be, so in any one region, patients with, you know, say a heart attack or stroke would have access to those therapies quickly. The other thing that was critical is communication. I think many of you have seen the dashboards that have been put up as locally, state, regionally, and at a national level. We did as well, and this communication with all of our stakeholders was critical to at least tell them what to anticipate, also to get feedback from them about what was happening in the field so that we could meet the needs. In addition, we put out a number of guidances, memos, and directives that would help manage the system during the time of surge. And then finally, working with our LA Public Health partners, we've had many webinars as well as conference calls, weekly conference calls with all of our stakeholders in each of the hospitals and their emergency management officers to help them work with the hospitals to meet the needs as we move forward. One of the things I wanted to mention, and it can't be underestimated the impact it had on the healthcare community, but was the support of healthcare providers on the front lines. This was from the flyover that was done in May during EMS week. And literally healthcare workers came out of the hospital and stood outside to see these jets flying over and waving and saying thank you. It really meant a lot to all of us. Innovation is another part of the anatomy of response, and certainly PPE. That was critical. Many people made their own PPE. We had garbage bags used as gowns until really the supply chain could be reinforced. After that, we had our federal response. We were recycling N95 masks with the Battelle Recycling Center, which was really critical at that time. In addition, because of Operation Warp Speed and the development of therapeutics, we had strategies for allocation through Health and Human Services, as well as California Department of Public Health to us. And we were involved in getting therapeutics with emergency use authorizations to all of our acute care hospitals. And that was just brought so much hope when remdesivir came online. There was great hope, as well as dexamethasone. Communication amongst all the stakeholders. Again, we had leadership calls as well as calls with all of our stakeholders. And then, as I mentioned, but I think it can't be undervalued, because this was absolutely critical to this, is leveraging public-private partnerships in order to meet the need, both for testing, vaccination, and distribution of therapeutics. This just shows you a picture of our warehouse. I'll go into a little more detail here. On the right are the list of our disaster resource centers, who all played a role in terms of distributing to all 70 hospitals in LA County. We distributed over 50 million items during this pandemic, and this is a list of items. And on the upper right, the biggest thing was the N95 masks that initially were in short supply. Now we have good supply. And then there was a concern about ventilators. That little box is actually a transport ventilator, but can be used for COVID-19 patients, as well as it has the ability to do high flow nasal cannula. So deliver high flow of oxygen to patients before they need to go on a ventilator. In addition, we distributed many tents. As you know, many of the hospitals had tents in order to care for patients outside. And so we were able to distribute those tents, both the Western shelters, DLX tents, et cetera, and certainly oxygen concentrators. One of the biggest things we did early on, and I'm very proud of our response here, is the allocation of remdesivir. As I said, this brought hope to many of us in the healthcare sector that we would again be able to treat these patients. And finally, now we're involved in helping support the convalescent plasma collection, as well as monoclonal antibodies. And these are antibodies that basically decrease viral load, which decreases the severity of illness. So pretty exciting stuff. And this is something that we're distributing. In addition, we had millions of pieces of equipment donated to us, which we were able to give out to many of our stakeholders, such as public safety, even some of the clinics, dental clinics, et cetera. And so we want to thank all of the donors. Moving on to what's next is vaccination. Vaccination is a true mitigation strategy. And there's great pride for many of the healthcare workers in receiving some of the first vaccine, knowing that they appreciated our service and wanted to keep us safe. And again, EMS played a huge role in this by allowing for expansion of the workforce to EMTs and paramedics to be able to stand up vaccination clinics, as well as to help vaccinate healthcare workers, EMS, and public safety personnel. And finally, as you know, the evaluation has just been data, information thrown at us on a daily basis. It's come fast and furious, but I'm thankful for the scientific community, which stepped up in a major way to support the healthcare sector in order to answer the most important questions needed in this pandemic. And finally, lessons learned. First, it's been a dynamic process. Data management was critical. Partnerships are absolutely what needs to be done. Communication, collaboration, and coordination was vital to rapid and effective responses in order to meet the needs of the public. I want to thank our state, regional, and federal partners for their help in keeping all the residents of Los Angeles safe. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm grateful to know our next speaker as a result of the work she does as a Harbor Interfaith Outreach Navigator for the city of Redondo Beach. Her own story and those that she shares of her clients lend a very real and human perspective to our homelessness crisis that is most times lacking in the perceptions most people have. Please welcome Lila Omura.
Hello, my name is Lila Omura, and I work for Harbor Interfaith Services, and I am an outreach housing navigator for Redondo Beach. A lot of people ask me why I chose to leave my previous employment of 27 years to go into this field, into homeless services. And you'll probably understand once I share a little bit about my story. My father, growing up, was an addict. He was a heroin addict my whole life. His drug abuse led our entire family into homelessness. So it was my mother and my two younger brothers that got evicted from our apartment and ended up living with my grandmother, which was really difficult. We did that for 3 years. We all slept on the floor in my grandmother's bedroom. You know, sometimes I feel I go overboard with some of these situations with these difficult clients. But the alternative, you know, if we just leave them be, they'll end up dying on our streets. So a typical day for me, people ask, what do you do? There is no typical day in homeless services. I get most of my calls from the police department. So my very first client in Redondo Beach, I met him 3 years ago. I went to the pier 5 days a week. I was there at 7 a.m. every day for 3 months while, you know, everybody was waking up and packing up and coming to the benches right at the turnaround at the pier. I would just sit there with them, there's about 20 individuals there every morning. And no one would talk to me. No one wanted to give me the time of day, but I consistently went there every day. So finally, after 3 months, one of my, we'll call him John. John finally asked me what I was doing there. And actually he said, what are you doing here with all of us bums? And I told him, I'm here to assist you. Whatever you need. You know, you may think you're fine living this way on the pier, which is fine, but you know what? Do you have an ID? Do you even have an ID? And he said, no. He said, so what's next? And I said, let's go get you an ID. And he said, okay, when? I said, now. Let's go right now. So he jumped in my truck, and that was the journey, the long, hard journey that started with John. So as we have to get them document ready. I mean, IDs, Social Security card, it's such a long process to qualify for anything. So at that time, you know, he wasn't ready for housing. He thought he would live the rest of his life on the pier. So we just work with them. My main objective when meeting individuals like this that are just, you know, they've given up hope basically, is to build relationships with them and build trust. So it's very important to me, if I say I'm gonna do something, to follow it all the way through, no matter what. So that trust is not broken, because he made it very clear in the beginning that he does not trust anyone. So during all the, you know, the next few months of, you know, just getting him situated, I was able to learn a little bit about his story, which would help us figure out the best way to assist him, because everyone's different. Everyone has a different story. So not only was he a senior with no income, no identification, he was hearing impaired. He had spent the early part of his life in prison. He was incarcerated for a very long time. So he was institutionalized. He was also an alcoholic. There was physical and mental health issues to top it off. So with all these challenges, I had to just work with him at his pace, which was very slow. But just, we continue to push through. That particular client, because we met so frequently, because, you know, we were starting at ground zero. The other individuals from the pier saw the consistency and saw how he was moving forward. So one day I pulled up to the pier and there's about 20 people all waiting for services, wanting to start the same process. We did all of that, worked through his court issues because he had a very extensive criminal background, history, which I knew was going to be a challenge when it came to being accepted from a landlord. So I am very grateful to the city of Redondo Beach and the collaboration that the entire city is willing to just help one individual. I mean, I can't tell you how many people were involved in this one client's case. I can only go so far. I have no control over the court system, but our city attorney's office was able to step in because I was able to share some of the challenges. You know, this client could do everything he was asked to do. I could do everything, but if he had, 30 open warrants, he would never get accepted into any type of housing. So the enhanced response to homeless pilot program had just kicked in. So we started going to court and we actually cleared up all of his open bench warrants and citations. So I'm very proud of him. He was very encouraged that he was finally hopeful that he possibly could get into housing. And that's what happened. It just happened. It just took 2 years to do that. He recently was housed because he was matched to a senior apartment unit, permanent supportive housing, which he definitely needed. It was specifically for someone that had a disability, which he did. So I am just so thrilled and so happy for him, so excited that he is in his unit. He is doing so well. And the work doesn't stop just when they're housed. We have to keep them housed, right? So I'm proud to announce that he has stopped drinking and he is focusing on his physical health. When I was working with him when he was living on the pier, he could hardly walk. He was using a walker and he was in excruciating pain. He had a few slipped discs in his back. But we hooked him up with a doctor and a specialist, and he just last week, actually no, it's just a few days ago, he walked into our homeless court to pick up a certificate of completion. And he's just so happy. So with that being said, and hearing a little bit about my story and John's story, I hope you understand now that, this isn't just a job for me. It is my heart, it is my passion to do this work and to help these individuals, believe and that they can do it, that they can have a better life. It is possible with hard work. And he did it. I mean, we all did it. The city did it together. So, it's not easy. So my friends and family, they think I'm crazy, absolutely insane. But, I just try to do what I wished could have been done for my father when he was struggling. And, I continue to push forward every day with excitement and with a lot of determination to go after those individuals that just lost all hope. And so, again, I just press forward, and in the memory of my father, again, just continue. I I'm so blessed to be able to continue to do this work. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Lila. I first heard our next speaker at one of our regional homeless task force meetings and immediately thought that what he and his company does is truly an idea worth sharing. Please welcome COO of Flyaway Homes, Kevin Hirai.
Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Kevin Hirai, and I'm with an organization called Flyaway Homes. In essence, what we're trying to do is create a new model where we systematize the by right modular construction of permanent supportive housing using social impact equity. And so the Flyway Homes model, as I mentioned, it's designed to be replicable, scalable, cost-effective, and rapid, which basically leads to the housing being affordable for those that most need it, which is what we know as permanent supportive housing or supportive housing. And so the way that we sort of do that are these different elements of systematizing. I'm going to go into each of these, but systematizing reduces the soft costs and hard costs by increasing the efficiencies in the design. And by iterating it over and over again, it becomes more like a manufacturing process than reinventing the wheel every time you build a new apartment building. From a scalable perspective, we wanted to be able to design a model that once existing, it would be able to scale up and, impact numbers in the tens of thousands of people in order to basically serve where the clients that we've been working with to this point, and in partnership with the People Concern, which is one of LA's larger social service agencies, kind of recognize that being able to have a scalable model where supportive housing is available to their clients is really the answer to ending homelessness. It's an agency that focuses on working with the homeless population to eventually find them housing and reintegrate them into society. And so, a key element of the scalable model, obviously, is funding. And a lot of the traditional methods, I'm sure we talked about, were, use federally subsidized type of funding models. Low-income housing tax credits is a big resource for developers building this type of housing. But we also sort of recognize the limitations and also the costs associated with those types of funding. And sort of by doing what we're doing, we're learning and understanding what those barriers are and quantifying what the cost to those barriers might be in order to understand what we could do to create this model that overcomes those challenges. And so from that perspective, social impact equity funding is a huge part of our model. And so it's essentially what that means. It's creating a fund of socially responsible individuals that are putting up money, expecting a return on their equity, but maybe willing to trade part of the, maybe a higher return for a lower return with the understanding what the capital is doing as sort of a residual benefit, or, some people call it a triple bottom line. And so by using the social impact equity fund put up by people that I'm talking about, a lot of those barriers are removed. The constraints wouldn't exist like they do when you're using federal funds, as an example. And so that was a big part of sort of the experiment. Could we raise private funding, whether it be through individuals or corporations that have money to invest for this social purpose? And again, the idea is to create this production model as opposed to building, starting from scratch every site you have, which obviously has its own costs when you're not doing something over and over again. And so with this sort of concept in mind, the idea is to, at the end of the day, create this model, scale it up, and the result would be a high quality, environmentally friendly. When you do this sort of production type model, you manufacture off site and you bring it on site. So it does create benefits of like green benefits, but build environmentally friendly PSH at an affordable cost in a time frame, that we can address the issue of homelessness. And that was generally the concept. And so we ended up building a couple of projects. The first project was really a pilot. It was literally funded by, 60 friends and family. I think there's 65 investors, each putting up units of $50,000 at a time to see if we could actually do this, the social impact equity fund to build supportive housing. And that worked. And, we housed 33 people at around the cost figures that we were targeting. And so this is our second project, the one that's up on the screen. And again, this is sort of another iteration where we sort of learned from the first go around certain things, and we try to implement them here and streamline the process. And then, again, we learned a lot going from the first project at Colden to this project on 82nd Street. And what the goal is to now do 3 projects at once. And we've secured grants, we actually won a housing innovation challenge from the city of LA that allocated us funding to sort of anchor, these 3 projects that we're going to build that are going to be, 40 to 50 units each, and sort of allow us to see if we could scale this model or what kind of efficiencies could be achieved by doing 3 projects at once. In other words, ordering 3 buildings from possibly the same manufacturer, getting some savings there, because we're doing sort of smaller site development, amortizing the cost of three smaller jobs is more attractive to these contractors than 1 smaller job on its own. And so to see what kind of pricing benefits we could possibly do, with the idea that this would be sort of a second iteration or proof of concept to the larger scalable model. And so this is sort of the second step, and when we talk about what kind of savings will we achieve from, say, replicability, if we could achieve it, we kind of modeled out some of those numbers, and you can see it's significant. It's not a 10% savings. It's it is a significant savings that if we can implement all these at the same time in the ideal world, would really get us to our goals. But as we all know, there are challenges, and we're not quite here yet, but these are the goals. And some of the additional impacts, that doing this sort of model or scaling this type of model would realize are, mentioned here. Racial equity, 77% of the target population of the properties that we're building are targeted towards people of color, and people with disabilities and health issues. And it's because we come from where we come from, it's definitely a conscious design, a tenant-centric design. And so, we just want to try to create a model that will be scalable, and taking all the other considerations that sort of go along with being able to have a model that is scalable, and being able, having a model that could be embraced by the majority of the population. And so some of the benefits, again, you have to sort of do it by proving it, but we'd actually, by building these projects and kind of proving the model, it reduces this not in my backyard, the NIMBYism that you see, because it's sort of, people then understand really what it is that we are talking about when we talk about supportive housing, and they're not threatened by it, and it actually adds value to their community in a lot of cases. And so just to sort of mention, again, Flyway, the genesis of Flyway comes from a committee of the people concerned, this agency saying, look, board members and concerned individuals, we have clients that are ready, we've been working with them, they're successfully ready to now find housing, but we just don't have any housing that's affordable for them. And so it sort of comes out of this agency's committee thinking about how can we possibly do this, which I think is important to understand where Flyway sort of comes from and the angle that they are building. We're builders per se, but we really are interested in figuring out how to house people with disabilities and families and children that this agency is already working with, that are ready to become no longer be homeless, if only they had a home to move into. And so again, these are some of the interesting, sort of how Flyway came to be. It was co-developed in conjunction with the people concerned. And I think it can definitely meet some of the demand that's out there, at least supplement the different models that exist and be part of the solution. And if it really does scale, I think it could be a bigger part than not. So accelerating the innovation, again, with these grants, sort of the pitch was, if you allow us this funding, it would let us try, say, 3 projects at once and understand what those outcomes would be from, doing this at scale, and what the results then would be as far as, the cost to house people, the potential benefits to the government, say, for the savings in police and medical needs of that individual that's now housed, as opposed to being on the streets and requiring constant medical, police, fire attention. And so, by studying these outcomes, we'll be able to sort of make a better case for why this is a worthy sort of model. And, Flyway Homes has never intended to build all these 20,000s of units. It's that, we want to sort of set out a model that others can kind of replicate and gravitate to, and kind of help to jump on the bandwagon and do this as a private venture. I think this could totally be scaled. And so these are the different things that we're working on at Flyway to get us to where we want to go. And these are the different elements that we're looking to sort of streamline and systematize. City government obviously understands the zoning and the permitting and the entitlement, but their land, just in the city of LA, in general, in California, is a highly prized commodity, limited resource. And so, finding the right land that's zoned appropriately for this type of development is a challenge. And so I think state government, federal governments are looking for ways to allow for more housing to be built. And sort of, there's an argument for densification, whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. But I think a lot of these policies are trying to address some of these systematic challenges. And then, kit aparts, this modular construction, I know it's really cool and trendy, and it on paper, it sounds really like it could save a lot of time. The issue is that it's just not a fully mature industry. But I think that it's well on its way. It's definitely not a new industry by any means. But I think it's in the near future, it will finally come into its own to be, done at scale to where I think the costs are becoming so high for traditional construction that it's basically becoming prohibitive, where this is going to be the only alternative where you could do anything for a reasonable cost. And so now that that's sort of a reality, real money and real effort is being put behind how to, figure out factory built housing. So I think that that's on its way. Definitely will lower cost of housing in general, not just for supportive housing, but just a matter of time. It's not quite there yet. And, limited number of suppliers for the types of work that we do, because it's such a regulated industry. I think that if we were to use private funds, where we don't have to have the types of bonding requirements that come with a lot of federal funding, would allow for obviously more competition, lower prices, and that's really what we're trying to prove out. So again, this is sort of our first project. We're really proud of it. These are pictures that were taken by one of my Peninsula High School buddies, and he took them, I don't know, a few months ago. So this is 2 years having housed 33 people. And I can tell you, being the property manager for the property, I would say probably 90% of the tenants that are there were the original tenants. A lot of them are families with kids that have gone through COVID, where, now they have a place where they can study and do their Zoom. And, I had the benefit being able to see, and understand firsthand sort of the individuals that this type of housing benefits. And so that's why sort of Flyway's it's a volunteer organization. We're a nonprofit, and none of us get paid because, we sort of believe that if we can figure this out, the benefits to the individuals that it will eventually help would far outweigh any sort of time and commitment we can put into trying to crack the model. So that in a nutshell is what Flyaway is. And I think that's the end of my deck. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Our next speaker has been instrumental in helping to create the new South Bay Fiber Network. Please welcome the CEO of American Dark Fiber, Dave Daigle.
Thank you, Christian, and good morning, everyone. My name is David Daigle. I'm CEO of a company by the name of American Dark Fiber, and we are a local telecommunications development company. I'd like to welcome all of you, particularly the COG membership and the constituents and all of those here today listening that are interested in the well-being for those that live and work here in the South Bay. You may have heard a fair amount about the South Bay Fiber Network. We call it a network of opportunity, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit more about it. Before I do so, what I'd like to do is just frame this discussion around some questions. And those questions are very apropos relative to why the South Bay Fiber Network was developed in the first place. So let me just pose a few of them. First, let me ask you, what do you think could happen if the transportation systems in the South Bay flowed more efficiently on a day-to-day basis? Or what could happen if we could directly impact the rate and depth of educational accomplishment in the South Bay? What may happen if we were able to bridge the digital divide to those that need it the most? What would happen to their lives? Likewise, what could happen if economic development was vastly improved or increased throughout the South Bay region? Think about those questions as I go through my presentation. First and foremost, I like to start with showing people what the South Bay Fiber Network is. And often a map is the best way to do that. On the screen, you see some blue lines, and we call that a ring, believe it or not, in the telecommunications world. And basically what that is a very resilient, continuous fiber optic network that touches every city in the South Bay, the City's Council of Governments region. Every city hall has a fiber optic connection that's a part of the South Bay Fiber Network. There are many other locations that are also connected to this network. And I'll get into the details of this in just a few minutes. But more importantly, I want you to see what it looks like. And at the top of that screen, I hope you can see it on the screen, we've got two nodes that are highlighted in yellow. These are two world-class data centers that play a very important role in the functionality of the South Bay Fiber Network. So with that, I'll move into some of the more tactical elements of the reason why the network was created and what we think some of the benefits of it not only are today, but they can be in the future. One of the primary goals up front was to create a community of interest or some intersections of the community throughout the region. One of the challenges many cities have is that they become an island. And when you deal with telecommunication networks, they're very expensive to deploy, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes. But a city acting on its own doesn't have as many choices as those that band together, like the South Bay City's Council of Governments did and created the SBFN. So in this case, we've got city halls, parks, and public works departments all interconnected to the South Bay Fiber Network. That allows very high-speed transport and internet connections to flow to these facilities. Likewise, regional government agencies and other NGOs are interconnected to the network. Likewise, anchor institutions, schools, hospitals, libraries can be plugged into the South Bay Fiber Network. Another very important element when you talk about high-speed capacity needs. Likewise, core constituents, residential communities and commercial corridors that have lacking broadband capacity can benefit directly by having more available and cost-effective bandwidth delivered to their doorstep. And last, I mentioned some data centers. These are somewhat of the glue that interconnects and intersects all of these elements. And it does so by just the sheer fact that the South Bay Fiber Network exists. And at Tier 1 data centers, and there are 2 of them connected to the South Bay Fiber Network, one in El Segundo at the Equinix Data Center, and the other in Hawthorne at the Evoke Data Center. These are locations where there are literally hundreds upon hundreds of digital applications and service applications, cloud-based applications that are available in a wholesale manner to anyone that's connected to those data centers. And today, by virtue of the South Bay Fiber Network, the South Bay is. And by the direct connection to cabinets that my company installed, those facilities, those capabilities can be readily transported across the South Bay Fiber Network to where they are needed most in the South Bay. So these points of interconnection are very important. The primary reason behind those, for us anyway, really is a simple thing. We wanted to bring more broadband to more places to benefit more people. And to do that, we had to satisfy not just today's needs, but we had to have a future-proofed network, one that allows for much, much more bandwidth to be created and used and consumed over time, really over the next 20, 30, 40 years on this network. And that's what the South Bay Network is. It's a future-proof network, purpose-built for community benefit. So let's talk about some of those benefits. These are value propositions that come out of the availability of the South Bay Fiber Network. First and foremost, traffic. Transportation needs are critical. Traffic synchronization, traffic control management, these are elements that are at the top of the list. People coming and going from work. When there's power outages or traffic accidents that clog the highways and byways, having managed traffic flow management systems that can be adapted on the fly and distributed throughout the region becomes critically important. And the South Bay Fiber Network not only is connected to all the cities that have traffic control management systems, but they're connected to Metro's major hubs that manage these regional traffic control systems. And they all fit together. It's a very important element of it. In addition, telemedicine and telehealth capacity is now available in a variety of places throughout the South Bay as a result of the South Bay Fiber Network. In today's era of COVID, particularly in a distributed, decentralized way, people couldn't go see their doctors. But if they had good broadband, they could do video conferences with their doctors. Certain diagnostics and just, doctors being able to question and have a discussion with their patients allow them to prescribe or at least deal with certain conditions they couldn't otherwise do if they didn't see them. So having available high-speed broadband becomes critically important for telemedicine and telehealth uses. Likewise, in today's mobile society, the wireless aspect cannot be ignored. Whether it's LTE and 4G or 5G type deployments, Wi-Fi applications going on in commercial corridors or in city parks and places like that, or just in having Wi-Fi available in parking lots at schools or, like I said, community centers where kids can do homework after school if they didn't have internet at home. These are the types of things that the South Bay Fiber Network is well positioned to help with. Moreover, when you talk about smart grid and smart home applications, these things can be done much more efficiently when it's connected to a fiber optic network or a high-speed network that's ultimately connected to the South Bay Fiber Network. So as adaptations and more devices are used at the home, they can be managed much more efficiently and more bandwidth distributed to these homes to make for a much more efficient, sustainable smart grid environment. And I mentioned earlier about cloud-based services that are available at data centers. These things are growing by leaps and bounds. A business that wants to have, say, Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, or some of those other type of cloud-based services, they are available at the data centers. And by having those distributed in a very, very wholesale and cost-effective manner across the SBFN, they become now affordable to those businesses. Another key, and for me, not to be least at all, is the educational aspect. This is a critical element, something that's very near and dear to us at American Dark Fiber. Education matters. And when we can help improve the educational climate within the South Bay by utilizing the South Bay fiber network, really magical things can happen. And what I mean by that is, let's just take a look at wages. And when you look at the educational disparity and the resulting wage gap that results, it'll jump off the page why the South Bay Fiber Network can help. First and foremost, we've got any person that, on average here in the United States, these are national statistics, that does not have a high school diploma and is working full-time, averages about a little over $600 a week in earnings, which, you know, not a whole lot in today's day and age, particularly here in the South Bay. They have a high school diploma, they move up closer to $800 a month. But those with a bachelor degree average over $1,400, I'm sorry, a week, over $1,400 a week in earnings. That is a massive disparity, and over a 40-year work lifespan can account to over $1.25 million going from a bachelor degree to a high school diploma, and even more than that if you don't have a high school diploma. So improving the educational capabilities throughout the South Bay region creates educational opportunity. It adds to the innovative qualities of the region and helps lift those that are in poverty out so they can truly get their arms around the opportunities that exist that require a solid educational base. So this is a very, very important element of the South Bay Fiber Network. In addition, we talk about economic development. There have been many, many studies done since the birth of the internet, and specifically over the last 20 to 25 years, and more specifically over the last decade. Google, for example, did an exhaustive study that showed empirically that in urban zones where there was broadband distribution that was densely connected the region in very cost-effective prices, there was nearly a 1%, actually more than a 1% improvement in local GDP. When you look at the greater Los Angeles area, that's a significant thing. Greater Los Angeles, GDP on an annual basis exceeds $1 trillion. A 1% improvement on that $1 trillion equates to over $10 billion a year in new wealth creation. That new wealth creation comes in the form of economic investment in businesses, helps an improvement of facilities where education can occur, or improved healthcare or clinics where more and readily available medical solutions can be distributed throughout society. So this is a very important element, and this is on an annual basis. And there's a big difference for those businesses. For example, the South Bay is no stranger to this. There's been many large entities that have moved out over the last 10 years, citing lack of available broadband, cost-effective broadband is one of the reasons why they moved. So this is a very important element to the South Bay Fiber Network, of which we are able to at least address in a very specific manner. Now, we do have some challenges. It's not a panacea. It takes a lot of community involvement to really extract the benefits of the South Bay Fiber Network. And I list costs at the top of the list here because it costs a lot of money to build these networks. On average, between $100,000 and $200,000 a mile to build a fiber optic network in a place like the South Bay. So by having the South Bay network now in place that was purpose-built, we can shorten the development that's needed so that those costs are actually less than they would otherwise be. The efficiencies on cost of both internet and transport capacity to homes and businesses will be dramatic as more and more connections are made. So that's an important element. In addition, community awareness. We need you to know we exist. This network was purpose-built for the benefit of the South Bay constituent region. And with that in mind, with that in mind, there are things that you need to be aware of that exists, and for you to tell us about that you'd like to have. We don't know, for example, if certain specific commercial corridors are truly lacking broadband capacity. If you are, we'd like to know about it. Likewise with neighborhoods. We've seen, for example, the city of Gardena deployed Wi-Fi networks that were a result of the South Bay fiber network internet capacity so that students could do their homework after school or in parking lots because they didn't have internet at home. These are very, very important things. Likewise for future uses, IoT, smart driving cars, other types of innovative applications that we don't even know about yet that will happen in many years to come. The South Bay fiber network is scalable. And so as these new innovations come to be, the South Bay network will be prepared to adapt, make use of, and distribute those capacities and the benefits of future needs as they come along. So with that in mind, I'd like you to just think about those questions. And when you look at the South Bay fiber network, it's going somewhere. And those STEM jobs are just a small example of what can happen with the availability of high capacity, cost-effective broadband in the South Bay region. And with that, Christian, I'll say thank you for having me. We'd love to address any questions that your audience may have. Feel free to contact me at any time to do so. And thanks for having me here today.
Thank you, Dave. A couple of years ago, I met a colleague of our next speaker. I'm truly grateful that he connected us, and now we have the opportunity to hear him share his journey and outlook on mobility. Please welcome Ahmed Darat.
My name is Ahmed Darat, and I'm a market lead at Cityfi, an urban change management consulting firm based here in Culver City. And I want to thank everybody today for having me to talk about integrating empathy into our mobility ecosystems. And so I want to start the day by talking a little bit about myself. My primary identity is that I'm an immigrant and refugee. My family comes from Libya, where my father was a political dissident to the Muammar Gaddafi regime. When I was 2, my family moved to America and settled in Lexington, Kentucky. However, in order to get into the country, we had to rely on other Arab countries providing us with immigration documents. So my father and my siblings and I came into the country with Sudanese passports, and my father came into the country with Iraqi passports. And as you might imagine, my father, once we decided we wanted to settle down, decided that he was going to go for a permanent residency through a political asylum process. And so little bit after this, Desert Storm happened. And as you might imagine, that sped up our process quite a bit. And so we ended up in court in Cincinnati, Ohio, where a State Department attorney argued that that my mother should stay in the country to take care of my siblings and I, while my father should be deported to face what was a most certain execution in Libya. But a government judge intervened at the time and ruled that our family should stay as a whole, and that we would receive our green cards and later receive our US citizenship. And so as I moved through my life, I then decided that I was going to study engineering. And I have, from a professional perspective, I still consider myself a transportation engineer. I spent 10 years working my way up in the Seattle Department of Transportation from an associate engineer to leading the entire signal world at the city of Seattle, where I was responsible for signal design, maintenance, and operations. As engineers, we're regularly taught to use science and investigative techniques and apply them to real-world applications. But somehow in the US, for transportation engineers, this has turned into building monstrosities like this. And so I want to kind of start talking about how we build in empathy. And so one of my favorite concepts related to empathy is this idea of Omatanashi, which is a Japanese word that roughly translates to the spirit of selfless hospitality. And Japanese culture holds this concept in very high regard and looks to every opportunity to apply it. And a great story that I've heard about this is on a Malcolm Gladwell podcast where he was working with Lexus on talking about their vehicles. They told the story about a design engineer that was responsible for their infotainment systems, who took a part-time job as a florist, working with people that had been in the industry for quite some time, so that he could better understand how to present something in a visual manner where people would love it and accept it as if it was a gift. And so your question might start to ask, what does this have to do with mobility? And so in transportation, we regularly think about the choices that people make. But all too often, we think about it from a very pretentious perspective about forcing mode choice on people and telling them like children that they need to eat their vegetables. But rarely do we ever think about the frame in which people make those decisions, and not only how they affect those modes, but how the modes affect them and the impact that those decisions have on them in their day-to-day lives. And in a sense, when we want to be empathetic in a situation with transportation, it's not just about being human-centered, but about being community-centered to think about the system as a whole. And this isn't the first time that anybody has thought about this. Very recently, locally here, LA DOT has laid out the principles of transportation happiness. And it looks at external factors and internal factors. And some of those internal factors are things like freedom to get around and freedom from disruption, right? But then also they look at external factors that are freedom from harm, freedom to connect, freedom from exclusion, which are mostly things that happen to people rather than choices that people make. And this isn't something that's a brand new concept or a brand new idea. We actually know what good design is. We know how to think about things empathetically. And you know, I love this picture from Seattle because it shows that in 1940, people were literally jumping on top of cars complaining about unsafe streets. And when we look at transportation safety and zoom into the modern world, what you start to see is that a city like Seattle has a great Vision Zero plan where we recognize that road violence is indeed a public health epidemic, and that we need to scientifically understand human behavior and how we make decisions in redesigning our streets. Very similar to the way that we do with the pandemic today, is that we make very educated decisions guided by the CDC and science. And so they look at things like in Vision Zero, like human perception at speed, and recognizing that people have faults and in human behavior, it has errors. And so then we also look at things that are happening outside of the vehicle and recognizing that as we increase speed by 20 miles per hour, our survival rate goes from 10%, it goes from 90% to 10%. And in reality, these are real people, and they're all too often people in communities of color that are dying in our streets every day, and that they have valuable lives and families that are being destroyed on a regular basis. And then finally, we contextualize it for people and tell them and ask them, is it really worth it? Is it really this valuable to get somewhere when we're in an urban environment? 5 miles per hour actually only means 17 seconds to the average commuter. And then we take this beyond and we say that it's not just a program, that Vision Zero is not a program, it's not a project, it's an overall approach. It's the way that you approach an idea and an empathetic way to approach idea. That it's okay that humans aren't perfect, but that if we focus on a systems approach that includes error in how we design and focus on serious and fatal collisions, that we can prevent them in very cost-effective ways. And another way that this is incorporated into the transportation world is when we think about the built environment and urban design. And so this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but this is the picture from The Godfather, where we can see that Michael Corleone is having his wedding in the public square. And the public square is literally part of the street. You can see the car right there in the background pulled up behind them. And we're starting to think about this in a more modern context. So cities all over the country are thinking about mobility hubs. And so rather than transportation being focused around people going to a central location like a gas station right now, that is very cold and auto-oriented rather than human and community-oriented, we're thinking about transportation in urban areas being centered around community-centered facilities where people can find their preferred modes in the easiest and most frictionless environment. And we've seen this through the pandemic on a day-to-day basis, where nearly every city in the world has thought about how do we actually maximize our public space in the most human way possible, recognizing that people can't be sitting in their houses all day long and that we need to get them out of their houses. We need to get them moving. We need to think about their health. We need to think about their overall communities, how they engage with other people, because we can't all just sit in our houses all day long and be on Zoom. And then we go beyond the built environment as well. So we think about this when we talk about technology and big data processes and algorithms, and that they don't account for our idealized values of humanity. What they really do is coldly codify our existing biases. And so this is an example from Seattle, where a study showed that Black Uber riders waited 30% longer than white Uber riders in Seattle. And is this because the app is racist? No, it's because the underlying inequities are institutionalized to the point where, in order to maximize profits, Uber is purposely incentivizing itself to not serve all our communities equitably. And so, again, we think about 2020 and all of the things that we've seen through the pandemic and the continued discussions about policing in communities of color, and how these institutional inequities have played out both through the loss of life in the pandemic and also through our community policing. And one of the things that, again, LADOT has been a leader in is how do we ensure that these cold algorithms are looking at institutional factors. And so it's not that government wants to rewrite the algorithms. It's just, we want to make sure that through developing stuff like the mobility data specification and the Open Mobility Foundation, that we can keep companies honest about their algorithms and about the way that they make decisions and about their business models to maintain our human and community-oriented values. And so with that, I kind of want to spend a few minutes here talking about how we can actually bring tools in to help us make these decisions. And so I'm just going to talk about two things really quickly, because we need to recognize that this isn't simple stuff. It's not that easy. It's incredibly complex, because as humans, we're incredibly complex. And we have regular touch points with government on a day-to-day basis in a number of different ways, whether it be transportation, utilities, environment, healthcare, education, social programs, amongst a number of other things. And so one of my favorite things to do when I walk through a design problem is think about design thinking exercises as a way to build empathy into what we're doing. So one of the best exercises for doing this is something called journey mapping, where we put ourselves in the persona of a real person in our community and walk through their needs and interactions on the subject matter that we're trying to analyze on a day-to-day basis. And this works best when we take a universal design approach and think about the most underserved people by our institutions and designing specifically for them. Because when we can design for them, we design for the entire community. Another tool that we've developed at Cityfi and has been talked about at multiple levels of government, and most recently with an executive order by the Biden administration, is looking at the total social cost benefit of making budgetary decisions. So with this tool, what we do is we look at the cost of a project or design feature, and analyze numerous options and look at the total return on investment, both from an economic, environmental, equity, happiness, health, safety, and then finally the traditional pure financial perspective, to really analyze true community-based return on investment. So what are people and what are we collectively going to see when a city or a government agency makes an investment and decides that they're going to do something? And so with this, what I'll leave you with is another quick story that really focuses on empathy here. In 1968, one of the leaders of the Prague Spring escaped Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia and gained political asylum in America. And this man had a son who ended up studying law. And later on in his life, he became an immigration judge in Cincinnati, Ohio in the 1990s. And so with that, what I want to leave you with is I wish you all good health, and I encourage you all to grab the bull by the horns here and realize that you too, like this judge, if you think from an empathetic perspective about your community's needs, will be able to change lives just like this judge was able to do with me. With that, I thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Ahmed. I can't say enough about our next speaker. I am honored to work alongside him and grateful that our city manager hired him as our police chief. Please welcome Keith Kaufman.
Hey everybody, my name is Keith Kaufman. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the police chief here in the lovely city of Redondo Beach. I was born in the city of Redondo Beach back when we had a South Bay hospital. I grew up here in the South Bay, attended West High, El Camino, then I moved on far away to UCLA, and then even farther to Cal State Dominguez. So as you can see, I've spent basically my entire life around here. I started policing in the city of Hawthorne. Shout out to all my friends there. I know you're watching. Back in the early 90s, post Rodney King era. And I was there up and through about 2015. You know, in those 22 years that I spent in Hawthorne, I kind of developed my own philosophy of policing and public safety. I saw things that worked and I saw things that didn't. Many of the things that we thought worked, they may have worked, but they worked temporarily. I think policing at one point in my tenure was really, how do we put a Band-Aid on a problem and move on to the next one, only to see that that problem would quickly arise again. But throughout my time in Hawthorne, I started to learn that there were a few things that I valued more than others, where I thought it really made a difference in our profession and pushing us forward. Those two things are community engagement and innovation. Truly engaging with the community, having a true community policing agency is much different than just having a community policing department or something written on a piece of paper. But true community policing and true community engagement is a hard thing to commit to. But I saw that when you did, the relationships that you would build could really push your agency forward in the community, and it would help you solve problems no matter what those problems were. And the last thing was innovation. You know, stagnation in law enforcement, just like many public service agencies, I thought it was terrible. You know, why aren't we doing things? Why aren't we trying things? Why is the private sector doing this, yet we can't seem to pull it off just because we're in government? So innovation really became a value of mine. What I want to speak to you today about are the two things that I feel are the most important that an agency head can do for their public service agency. And that's create a vision and create value. I've never understood why, when I ask many of my cohorts in public safety, what's your department's vision? I never understood why they didn't have one. Sometimes we would ask that on a promotional exam and someone would rattle off some mission statement that had 3 or 4 paragraphs and they'd mess most of it up. And the reality is that does nobody any good. If you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what your call to action is within your certain agency, what you're going to do is you're going to be happy with the status quo. That's the problem with public safety. It inherently breeds mediocrity. Our system doesn't reward excellence and innovation. Basically, the longer you stay, the more you get paid. And that's a good way to project to the men and women that work in this industry that it's okay to maintain the status quo. But we all know public safety is expensive and it's not okay for our communities. You have to create a vision. Look at Tesla, for example. Their vision, accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Super simple. I bet you that every Tesla employee knows it. Coca-Cola, refresh the world and to create value and make a difference. Very simple. Walmart, save money, live better. Why doesn't public safety have a vision? Why don't we tell our men and women where we're going? Well, here in Redondo, we do. We got together, we created a vision, and that vision is we are the community leading the way in law enforcement. Now it's simple. Everybody knows it. Everybody that works here can repeat it. In fact, I won't hire somebody unless they know it, understand it, and can tell me how they're going to contribute to it and help push that vision forward. When we say we are the community, what we're saying is we want to be one with the community, completely involved, embedded no matter what the issue, or even if there's not an issue. In fact, the way to build relationships is not to do it in a time of crisis. It's to do it when you have time to sit down and find a common ground with the people that you're working for. We have sayings around here like, if it happens to you, it happens to us. And what we try to do is reward our men and women for finding ways to better engage the community every day. That's the first part of our vision. The second, leading the way in law enforcement. That's the innovation piece. Why do we have to settle for what we do just because that's what we do and that's what we did before? Our vision helps empower people. It creates a culture where it's okay to fail as long as you fail forward. When I first got to Redondo and we put our vision in place, one of the first things I wanted to do was to see who took a risk and who failed at it. And once that happened, I told everybody that worked here, I want to see that person in my office. Not to put them down, but to reward them for taking the risk and showing others that it is okay to do so. When you have a vision and you have this call to action and you can create an era of empowerment and people know where we're going, the vision should answer the question, what should we be doing right now? When someone comes into the office and they say, hey boss, I'd like to try this or I'd like to do that, I'll always ask them that question. What part of our vision does that support? And if they can tell me what it does and we can afford it or there's no other major obstacle, then I'm always going to say, well, let's try it. The beauty about having a vision is that it creates value. And this is where public safety needs to focus. It's so upsetting when I see agencies be compared to one another on a dollars and cents level. I see a fire department and they're looking at moving the county fire department in and they're looking at it at dollars and cents. To me, that makes no sense. We should be looking at value. If you're looking at mere dollars and cents, it's quite possible that those agencies have not created value. And what I mean by value is, if there was a linear line and we have this much time, this is how much time we're allotted to do what we do in public safety. Over here, this little fraction of time, that's what we have to do. Every police agency is the same, every fire agency is the same. Radio goes off, we react, we go to our call for service. That's what we have to do. But the rest of this line, the part over here, that's what we can do. And that's where you create the value. If you dedicate time, resources, money, everything into this section of where you can be, that is where you're going to find your innovations. That's where you're going to attract people to your agency. That's where you're going to create value in your community. And that is how the culture of your agency is going to be defined. How come public agencies aren't all the same? They all have different cultures. Most of it is defined not in that small section of what we have to do, the reaction. It's in the proactive section of what we can do. And here at Redondo, that's where we focus because that's how we provide value. In fact, if someone asks me, and this is a hard question to answer, ask your chief of police or your fire chief, what is your job? What do you actually do? I've thought about that a long time. The best answer that I've ever come up with is, my job is to ensure the men and women that work for me create value in the community. In other words, they're not just warming a seat, they're not maintaining status quo. I'm finding ways to have them push our vision forward, to feel that the selflessness of the badge, the commitment to public safety and public service, that's the reward. And if they create value in that system, thus creating value for our community, then I'm doing my job. The benefit of having a vision and focusing on what we can do and creating value is that when these intersections come up where law enforcement is, faced with whatever the next dilemma is, instead of approaching that intersection and just hitting it at a red light and not knowing which way to go, because we've only been doing one thing, reacting to problems, what a lot of agencies are going to do is they're either going to blow through the intersection, they're going to blow through that red light, crash and burn. A lot of them are just going to make a U-turn and go the other way. but the ones that have vision and the ones that have value, they find a way to merge with the other directions. Every intersection has generally four components. So if you're approaching from the south and the way that you've created value within your agency allows you to work with other entities out of the box, other people, figure out how law enforcement and public safety fits into the big picture, then you'll find a way to merge with the people approaching from the north and from the east and from the west. I thought of a couple examples of this, and one would definitely be homelessness. So we've had homelessness throughout my entire career, but lately, as we all know, it's become a crisis. There's many things that cause that. Today is not the speech to go into it, but when Redondo Beach PD approached the intersection of homelessness, rather than bust a U-turn, we figured out how we were going to merge. And I truly believe it was our vision and the creation of value that allowed us to make that merger. Rather than just focus on what the average law enforcement agency would do, which would be enforce, we started figuring how to turn enforcement into a solution. And we did that by working with all of our partners, city leadership. Our city manager created a task force. Our politicians went out and got grants through agencies like the South Bay COG. We hooked up with Harbor Interfaith to get housing navigators, PATH, Exodus, the Public Defender's Office, the judges, the City Attorney's Office, you name it. We brought everybody together and got on board and said, how can we help solve this problem? And we started making headway there. It's because our merger into that intersection was open. And then, of course, COVID hits. And what could be worse? We're finally making progress, and now we're faced with this next intersection. Well, rather than hit a U-turn, we talked with all of these people and came up with the idea, why don't we move the court out of the courthouse and into the open, bring it here to the city, and we'll hold our homeless court outside so that we can continue the forward progress. And it took a tremendous amount of work. The police department's not going to take credit for any of this. The amount of work that went in with our public works department and our city attorney and our political leaders, everybody, they had seen the vision and they saw the progress and the value, and they were dedicated not to let it stop. So we were able to keep the ball rolling and bring homeless court here to the city. What I want to get back to is making sure that when you go into a public agency, you don't look at it as, hey, I'm just going to maintain the status quo and keep myself out of the paper. You've got to create a vision. By the time you guys see this, I'll be turning the chapter in the next book of my, what did I just say? I'll be turning the chapter in the book of my life, I guess. And that next chapter is going to be very interesting because I've been asked to move over and look at the fire department and become the acting fire chief there. Well, obviously, I wear this uniform. I don't wear that one. So needless to say, I'm a little bit nervous. However, what do you think my first order of business is going to be? It's going to be to go in there, talk to the men and women, figure out what values they already create with the community, and then really lean into how do we create a vision moving forward. I'd like to thank you for your attention today. I hope that this is something that you can bring back to public safety, and thank you for all the work that you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Keith. I met our next speaker while I was working with many others on trying to bring community choice aggregation to the South Bay and LA County. Please welcome from the LA County's Office of Sustainability, Kristen Torres-Pauling.
Thanks to the South Bay City's COG and especially to immediate past chair, Christian Horvath, for inviting me to participate. I'm Kristen Torres-Pauling with the LA County Chief Sustainability Office, and I'm excited to be joining you all today. I want everyone to take out their cell phones. I know you've been checking it. You're going to probably check it throughout my talk anyway, so I might as well just get it out. Now that you have it in your hands, look at your wallpaper. what's the picture that's on your lock screen or background? Maybe a pretty sunset, portrait of your spouse, faces of your smiling kids. On my personal phone, I have a picture of my daughter that I took on September 9th of last year. She was 4.5 months old. I'd just taken her out of the bathtub. She was wrapped up in a cute footed towel. So to me, an extremely cute picture. You know, I think she's obviously the cutest baby in the world, but empirically, nothing super special. Sort of a run-of-the-mill picture of her in her daily life. So why do I have that particular photo? Well, it was the only picture I took of her that day. Basically, as soon as I got her dressed, I spent the rest of the day glued to the news, seeing this imagery of the West Coast on fire and the subsequent ash and dire air quality ramifications of those fires. I also have another phone. I have my work phone. I have a picture on that one too. It's the total contrast to that cute bath time picture, but it's from the same day. It's the orange sky that enveloped the Bay Area on that particular day. It's from the Bay looking on to the skyline of San Francisco. So why did I go with those pictures from that particular day? There was all kinds of very memorable days in 2020. Well, because those fires across California and beyond really exacerbated my feelings of being trapped. I thought, as a first-time mom struggling to take care of a child while working from home in a pandemic, I kind of knew what it meant to be confined to your house. It turns out that when your only respite from that is occasionally opening up your sliding glass door to take a quick break or doing a short walk around the neighborhood, when you even take those possibilities away, it's a whole new level. I couldn't do really anything to fix it. All I could do was make sure my air filter was clean and that our windows were sealed shut. And luckily we just finished upgrading our windows. And we were limiting the use of our gas stove as much as possible to make sure we weren't making our indoor air quality bad as we strove to keep the unhealthy levels of air pollution out. So I used to work as an air pollution specialist for the state. So I was acutely aware of just how unsafe those levels of pollution were for developing lungs. It's pretty scary. And I was especially surprised at how many parents of young children didn't know that. As that week of terrible air quality continued, the sky started looking better eventually, and the news started reporting about the levels were safer to go out again. But I knew that I had to pay attention to those air quality index levels even more closely for those sensitive groups, as they're called, which include young children. Those levels didn't return to safe for even more days after, when people sort of thought it was safe to go outside, just sort of by visuals. So we didn't go outside once for about 5 days. That was pretty rough. In the midst of all this, my team at the Chief Sustainability Office happens to be kicking off a new effort to analyze climate vulnerabilities throughout the county. About a year before, we'd heard from stakeholders around the county and from our colleagues within the county that getting a more in-depth grasp of how climate change would impact people and infrastructure was essential. Lots of those kinds of studies have been done before, but none at the scale of LA County, and none in a way that was considering both the social implications and the physical infrastructure implications. Just so happens that we planned our very first public meeting on what we're calling the Countywide Climate Vulnerability Assessment on September 10th, so a day after I took those pictures. And as a climate change expert, I'm hyper aware of why we are experiencing record-setting fire and after record-setting fire, that this question of who and what is impacted and where is one that not enough of us are thinking about or asking with enough urgency, as this work is now revealing. And I think September 2020 began to really hit that home for us and illustrate it in a new way, or at least for me. So for example, I don't live in a part of LA that would show up as high wildfire risk. My wildfire risk is very close to zero if you look at the state maps that we all rely on in this space. Much like the case for many parts of the South Bay. The Palos Verdes Peninsula does of course have wildfire risk. So that would show up when you look at existing maps. But as we're now experiencing, we are understanding a new intensity to the increasing likelihood that our air quality will be impacted by regional wildfires. Really not much of the current approach to climate planning properly accounts for that. Now, what sets the South Bay Cities COG apart is that your leadership had the foresight to do a climate adaptation plan that was published in 2019. The climate adaptation plan was an early regional strategy to take seriously the risks facing your communities and thinking specifically about what the role of a council of governments is in this space. If you haven't read it, or your staff hasn't read it, you should have them take a look. It has a lot of good details and maps that are specific to your cities and how COG will lead on actions requiring regional coordination. In fact, we thought it was so well done that some of the folks who helped put it together are now part of the team helping us put ours together. But I'll tell you that the space of assessing how climate change is exposing vulnerabilities is rapidly evolving. Just look at what's happened in Texas with basically an entire state's electricity generation and distribution systems offline due to extreme temperatures. There were probably some voices out there suggesting that electricity reliability in that state was vulnerable to climate change, but I don't think anyone envisioned the human suffering and costs it's taken on the residents of that state. So I think we all need to be spending some time picking apart and bringing our own experiences and expertise to this conversation about preparing for climate change. In that vein, let me bring us back to my air quality woes and this county climate vulnerability assessment that we're undertaking now. If you go off of the maps of wildfire risk, again, much of the LA area technically shouldn't be concerned. But if you think of the secondary impact of wildfires, nearly all of our communities light up as being impacted. And so basically the impact of the impacts, that's where we need to be focusing. And meaning that needs to be reflected in your cities and the planning for climate change. I looked at the COG's plan and flipped to that wildfire risk section, and the word air quality is only mentioned once. That's not a knock on the plan, it's a knock on the lack of data that was available when the COG's team was working to put on the plan, or put together the plan. The plan was meant to be data driven, so that reflected the situation. And that's a lesson that we're looking at now, focusing on the secondary impacts of climate change as we do our assessment. Another early finding that we've pulled together is from some new data and experiences is around worker safety during climate events. New research out of UCLA is showing serious economic ramifications of worker injury due to high heat events. And that's not exclusive to workers who might first come to mind, like say mail carriers and utility workers who do their job exclusively outdoors. The data is starting to reflect how people who are technically indoors but might have limited access to cool air are just as likely to experience issues or maybe more during extreme heat. For example, how many of you have auto repair shops in your cities? Probably high share of you. Those workers aren't technically classified as outdoor, but they do have limited ability to get away from poor air quality and extreme heat. So now let's crack open that section of the COG's adaptation plan. There is a chapter on outdoor workers. But now this new experience is showing us, what about those other kind of workers in the South Bay who might not technically be outdoors, but have limited access to air conditioning? I'm thinking specifically for the South Bay manufacturing workers. Again, that's not a knock on the COG's plan, but more of a group realization that climate is permeating more of our economy and lives than we thought possible even just 2 years ago. One other area that's cropped up in this very intersectional climate adaptation planning space is the involvement of the financial sector. At the county, we've had a credit rating agency ask us about our plans to respond to climate change. So, and in 2019, we were able to maintain our highest bond rating because we actually had a response to that. Moreover, I'm on the state's climate and insurance working group, representing the LA area and local governments. Who else is at that table? The head of the California Insurance Industry Group, the international reinsurance companies, other heavy hitters like that. Just to illustrate this further, one of the companies recently told me that they now have address level data about climate risk. The sophistication from the financial sector is getting quite high here because they understand those risks, or want to better understand the risks, understanding that there's real dollars at stake. Moody's now owns the country's most advanced climate adaptation modeling firm. And very few adaptation plans at the local level consider the role of, say, insurance and the financial sector in their plans, the county included. So where do we go from here? All of your cities are required to do some level of climate adaptation planning work while updating the safety elements in your general plans. So I invite you to ask your city managers and planning directors where they are in this work. Have they considered doing your own city climate adaptation plan? Are they prepared to explain to credit rating agencies your city's plans for being resilient in the face of climate change? So I started by sharing about a hopeful picture from the day, that day that I mentioned, a picture of my daughter. I shared that because while the days for us to both zero out our climate emissions and plan for the impacts that we already know are coming, those days are waning. But I still fundamentally believe it's possible to avoid, these bigger calamities, but we have to start acting now. That's why I have my daughter's picture on the phone to remind me that she's only going to be 69 years old in the year 2099, which is the year that most climate models go out to. That's sort of the end of century timeline that we're using in our climate vulnerability assessment. So she'll still be living her life then, hopefully, and I want to make sure that we're in a good scenario and not the dire one. So she can have the luxury of putting a lovely palm tree and a pretty beach on her phone or whatever fancy device she'll be carrying around then. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time and to let you know that we and your COG staff are a resource in this space, and that feel free to reach out to us and your COG staff about questions related to how to prepare for climate change. Thank you all, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you, Kristen. I reached out to our next speaker after reading one of his articles, written shortly after his moving from Sacramento to Los Angeles. I appreciate his reporting on our statewide housing issues. Please welcome LA Times journalist, Liam Dillon.
Everybody, my name is Liam Dillon. I'm a reporter with the Los Angeles Times. I've covered housing affordability issues during my entire tenure with the Times, which has been 5 years. First out of our Capitol Bureau in Sacramento, covering the legislature and state politics and policy, and now more recently over the past 18 months based in LA, covering housing issues statewide. And I'm excited to be here to kind of share with you what I've learned about my time writing about housing and some of the underlying housing problems facing the state, and also share a little bit about my personal story. So I have a presentation here, and I'm going to share that here. Okay. All right, so why does California have a housing crisis? And let's just define the scope of the problem to start with. And so as you see, state's median home value is over $600,000, and that's 2.5 times or nearly 2.5 times the national average. And rents are also really high. In major metros in the state, at least $600 more a month than the national average. And despite the pandemic, in many cases, still growing. And so just some more specific numbers across the US, talking about $1,700 a month for a median one bedroom. In San Francisco, that's close to $3,000, LA, $2,600, San Diego, $2,400. And then even in poorer markets like Fresno, rents have been up more 36% since 2007, with some of the highest in the country increases during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what does this problem mean? It really shows that at base, so many of California's problems come back to housing. You have high poverty. It's with a low home ownership rate, it's really hard to build wealth. You have soaring homelessness. You have squeezed budgets for everything when folks are paying so much of their incomes every month on rent. And you have a huge drag on the state's economy versus construction job because of the lack of construction jobs, and less economic activity because, again, people are spending so much of their money, their income on their place to live. And now, during the pandemic, we could very easily see how things could be made much worse in the state. This slide is from a story that I did in January, showing that according to one estimate by the state court system, eviction cases are projected to double once the pandemic ends. You're seeing statistics on rent debt where it could be anywhere from $400 million that tenants owe landlords to over $4 billion. Now, there has been some help coming in terms of eviction protections, and now there's a relatively new tenant and landlord assistance plan, but it's unclear kind of how all of this is going to work. Plus, all this is kind of haphazard and maybe hard to make work. You know, what do we do for tenants who aren't on official leases? Much of the relief that's being offered, you know, requires a tenant to go into debt in the first place. And so if you don't have a lease, how do you even know, or how can we even prove that you have back rent when in fact you do? And of course, these folks are going to continue to have housing problems. So how did we get here? And folks may be aware, this is the guy, a New York mayoral candidate a number of years ago who became famous with his slogan that the rent is in fact too damn high. So at base, our issue is that we don't build enough housing. We didn't build enough before the pandemic, and we don't. You know, if we add jobs like we have been doing in the state over the past decade, and you don't add enough housing, you can see that there's a fundamental imbalance, and that's going to create an affordability crunch. You know, we used to build in California a lot of housing up through the 1990s. Even you saw obviously it's cyclical, but huge growth in the 80s, and then even up through the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a decent amount of housing growth. But even during this most recent recovery, prior to the pandemic, you can see that home production has not really caught up. That one line there, it says how much we need to build to meet demand. That's 180,000 units a year, 180,000 homes. And that's the projection from the state housing department that they say we need to keep pace with population growth, or what a healthy rate of population growth would be. And then you may see up at the corner there, Gavin Newsom, a little picture of him. That's his goal of having not quite the scale, but his goal of having 500,000 units a year produced, which you see, it would be a remarkable number in California history. That's something he promised on the campaign trail, and you can see we're not even close to that amount. So what happens when you have this sort of squeeze, this imbalance between, you know, supply of housing, which is low, and demand of housing, which again over the past decade has been really strong? You have wealthy people coming in because they can afford to pay the higher rents. You have poorer people who can't afford to pay these rents moving out. You have newcomers paying more, and rising home values also being a boon to homeowners, especially because under Prop 13, their property taxes are capped. And so they see big benefits from rising values of their homes, their wealth, without sort of seeing corresponding increases in their taxes. Now, it's not just about building, as this sort of next slide will show. We also don't fund affordable housing at levels that the state needs. So there was a recent study, or relatively recent study done by the state legislative analyst, which is a nonpartisan outfit based in Sacramento that works for the legislature, that did a kind of a thought experiment and how much would it cost to build new housing just for the low-income families in California who spend more than half their income on rent. And they put forward a huge bond measure, would be a way to do it. And to do it would cost between $15 billion and $30 billion a year over the next 3 decades to finance, which is roughly what the state spends annually on its Medi-Cal program, its healthcare program for low-income Californians. So a huge outlay, right? It's also, I think, though, keeping context here, and this goes to show how far in the hole we are, that we do subsidize homeowners in California and across the country much more than we do low-income renters. And these subsidies are in the form of the mortgage interest deduction or capital gains exclusion. California has its own version of the mortgage interest deduction. And so there is a lot of subsidized housing that exists in California. And in fact, these subsidies tend to go more towards homeowners than they do to renters. So all of this, of course, was true prior to the pandemic, and now we're in a situation where many of these issues are scrambled in many ways. You know, we're seeing kind of a bending and stretching of inequalities that have already existed in housing. So for instance, low mortgage rates are spurring a rush to own homes for those who can afford them and have down payments socked away. it's a great deal. You can, you're now being able to get much cheaper money and able to use that to buy a house. But this has also meant that home prices have continued to rise to even more unaffordable levels. You've also seen some major rent drops in large metros spurred by the pandemic, which are allowing middle and high income renters who have been affected, not very much by the economic downturn during the pandemic, allowed these folks to access housing that was unaffordable even just a year ago. And then you have disproportionate job loss and health impacts due to the pandemic, harming low-income renters who are continuing to struggle and also unable to take advantage of the lower average rents. And these folks are the folks who are most at risk of piling up that rent debt that I mentioned earlier, potentially on the verge of eviction, and also even potential homelessness. And then speaking of homelessness, the folks who are already on the streets or are living in cars, prior to the pandemic may or may not have received direct assistance. And so their circumstances remain just as or even more so vulnerable than they were in previously. So I'm going to change and talk a little bit now about my own story, which in some ways kind of mirrors at least the housing situation as it's been for middle and higher income, renters in recent years. This photo is from a story that I wrote documenting my move in the fall of 2019 when I came from Sacramento to Los Angeles. And in doing so, my rent more than doubled. I was paying about $2,300 a month in LA compared to $1,100 in Sacramento. And in my housing search, I had a couple of things that I wanted to make sure that I had. I didn't want to drive an hour to get to work. And so I wanted, our LA Times building is now in El Segundo on the west side. And so I wanted a place that was kind of near transit and near stuff. And everything I saw as I was looking around, scouting for places was worse than what I had in San Francisco or in Sacramento, and also more expensive. Like, once you have a dishwasher, it's hard to go back to not having a dishwasher anymore, right? And so to be clear, while journalism is not a super lucrative profession, I was sure that I was not going to have to spend more than 30% of my income on rent when that's the federal definition of being rent burdened. And just that fact put me among the top half of renters in the state. And again, to be clear, there's a lot of security and sort of privilege in that position. But as a reporter covering this issue, I knew my rent was going to double, but there's something to be said, I think, for kind of the pit in your stomach that grows once you realize what that's going to do to your budget and your bottom line, how much more you're going to need to dedicate of your income to rent. And I'll transition now to sort of something that happened, again, talking about the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on my housing situation. It's actually, been positive. Once the pandemic hit, I was ultimately able to take advantage of one of the scenarios that I had outlined above. Over the summer, we had to take a 1-day-a-week furlough at the LA Times, but fortunately, we were eligible for unemployment and made whole. And so my economic situation is, just as good or strong as it was prior to the pandemic. And so being financially secure, I was able to find an apartment in Santa Monica that not only I never could have afforded this time last year, it's 5 blocks from the beach. And not only do I have a dishwasher in my apartment now, I even have a washer dryer. But just for fun, taking a look at this, I looked at some Zillow listings for some condos relatively near me. And even with a healthy amount down, buying a home would result in a mortgage double to what I'm paying in rent now. And so you can see that stretch that I mentioned earlier happening. Even my housing situation has improved. It's not like homeownership for me is any closer than it was, and in some cases even further away than it was before the pandemic. So I want to go back to kind of end here with what I'm kind of looking for and what I think will be important to follow as we see the ways in which the pandemic is going to change and again further stretch some of these issues and inequalities that were in the California's housing market already. It'll be, certainly be tracking changes in homelessness. There has actually been decently robust programs that have been put forward to house homeless individuals, both on a temporary basis and in some cases in a permanent basis in old and underutilized motels. The state has done a pretty decent job of purchasing these and operating them at a quick rate, but obviously it has not changed the situation, or you can't really notice much of a situation change on the ground. And then what that means, when these the federal assistance that allowed for these efforts end, And once some of the financial assistance ends, whether our homeless population will sort of continue to grow in the state, or whether the state will be able to ramp up to try to meet that. And then I think also talking about, as I said, the rent debt and some of the holes in the rent debt situation is also going to be, really an issue that is going to be very important to watch going forward. I mentioned some of the sort of informal relationships, and I think in some of the protections that have been offered so far, you have not had taking into account a lot of circumstances that low-income renters are facing. I'll just give an example. I was recently reporting on a story in San Francisco, which has seen some of the largest rent drops, in fact, the largest rent drops in the country. But I spoke with a tenant and her family. The tenant was a house cleaner, lost her job at the beginning of the pandemic. Husband was a factory worker. He got coronavirus in November in the fall. Once that happened, the family was unable to make their rent payments and had to leave. The landlord was pressuring them to leave their apartment. They left without any rent debt, but are now living with the tenant's mother, 10 people now. The family has 3 children in a 3-bedroom apartment without really any way of getting out of the situation. The husband now, the mother now takes care of the kids who are out of school during the day. And the husband is a day laborer, kind of standing outside of the Home Depots and Lowe's, trying to get work any way he can. But they're not able to take advantage of these lower rents because the rents still aren't low enough to a point where they will be able to qualify. And so, and none of the rental assistance programs that have been put forward at the state level so far help some of these folks. And so what will happen to these people? I mean, the situation is going to be such that it's unlikely or unclear how long it's going to take for the economy to recover and for housing availability to be there for folks who are at some of the bottom rungs of the economic ladder here. And then also, when it comes, I think, lastly, when it comes to home ownership, what does that look like? Again, as I said before, if you can afford it now, you have access to cheap money. And we're hearing a lot more, I think, about folks who are able to buy second homes or are able to buy homes that they want to turn into investments, perhaps even some institutional investors coming in and buying single-family homes that they plan to rent out or use as short-term rentals or Airbnbs. And what does that mean for home ownership for folks, again, who are unable to keep pace with these sort of rising housing prices? And so, in some ways, certainly the pandemic has changed the California housing situation, but I don't overall think it's made it less dire. And I think in almost every case, the situation is even more precarious than it was before. So that's the end of my presentation, and thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Liam. I met our final speaker this morning 3.5 years ago while participating in a Link Housing Partners tour around Long Beach. I appreciate his unique perspective on what economic development means for any city and its residents. Please welcome Long Beach Economic Development Director, John Keisler.
Good morning, and thank you for having me today. My name is John Keisler, and I am the Economic Development Director for the City of Long Beach. And I really wanted to share a little bit about the future and emerging role of economic development in local government. It's a pretty incredible time in our history, and we all, as local government leaders, are looking for new ways to help our communities emerge stronger from both a pandemic and an economic crisis. So I think one of the most important things, I'm going to say, know who you are and grow who you are when it comes to economic development, because everything begins with our own history. Long Beach is different than many other cities, but ultimately we have these special characteristics about making things and moving things, and our economy has evolved out of that DNA that was laid so many years ago. The other thing I think is understanding about exactly what that means economically. Where are our jobs? What was impacted by the most recent economic cycle? And until we really understand who we are at a detailed level, it really is difficult to know what the opportunity is for growth. But we also need to focus, our efforts. So focusing our efforts and our investments on the right parts of our community, who works in which different sectors, and how does that affect different parts of town. That is a really important part, because our people and our community is really how our economy moves. The other thing that I think is really, really important right now, as we're focusing on the future of role of economic development, is acknowledging the challenges that we face with regard to racial reconciliation. We learned so much about our communities over this past pandemic, and of course the incidents involving George Floyd, that by acknowledging who we are and the challenges that we face, we can start to cure some of those challenges that have been with us for a long time, but also help us to become healthier as an economy as we move forward. So over the years, the role of economic development has really been to help our city and find ways to generate revenue to pay for city services. But I like to challenge us all to think about how we are more of a regional economy now in Southern California, and how collaborating with our community and the communities around us to bring all of these different assets that we have together and make this whole region more competitive in the national and international economy. I am always surprised, how many residents in our community in Long Beach actually commute out to your cities every day in LA and Orange County to find good jobs and ultimately use their skills to maximize their income potential. But ultimately, our job is to build on a regional basis and together the infrastructure that the private sector needs, whether it's through international trade or through our ports, our airports, our freeways, our rail. And all of that infrastructure that we're building is shared, because it cuts across all of our city borders. And that's how I believe our emerging role of economic development is so much more about preparing the environment and building the infrastructure that on a regional basis this modern economy is going to work on. So some of the things that we're trying to do from a real estate investment standpoint to attract real estate investors, developers, private sector investment is really by preparing the environment. So enhanced infrastructure financing districts, special plans or special districts where we have more density and we allow for transit-oriented development. We can really take an active role in shaping the future of our economy by preparing the physical environment through our regulatory roles to attract that kind of investment that we need and want that supports our economy. Also through partnering. We have to think now, we don't have redevelopment agencies. We can't just go in and buy a bunch of land and demolish it and sell it again. We really have to partner with the private sector to do P3s, public-private partnerships, and that can involve financing, designing, building, operating, maintaining our civic infrastructure like we just did in Long Beach to get much, much more than we could on our own. Also including people, connecting more people to high-tech infrastructure. So one of the big initiatives in economic development here is we started an economic and digital inclusion coordinator role in our economic development department to help connect more businesses and community members, workers, students, seniors, people who didn't have internet connections with hardware and literacy and training and security. And we've done about $1 million now in digital inclusion work over the past couple months to get more households connected so that they can participate in this modern economy. Also just using technology to innovate and deliver services in more efficient ways. And so as an economic development department, we realized that, hey, getting those resources out to community members, business owners who need standard questions answered, or maybe they want to ask and answer these questions through new formats like their mobile device in the middle of the night when we don't have our call centers open or we don't have people available. So looking for ways that we can leverage information technology, just like we were with our transportation or our high-tech infrastructure, to really engage people in new ways that meet them where they are. And then investing, actually becoming an investor. The city and local government has typically stayed out of business development in the sense of trying to help new businesses find access to capital. But we don't always have to be, the source of the answer. We can partner with community development financial institutions, nonprofit crowdfunding platforms online. And we've done that in Long Beach, and we've helped by connecting business owners and helping them connect with these kinds of crowdfunding tools to get their businesses started. So sometimes city as investor as well, which is a new role that we're having success with. And then partnering with our universities. Talent is king in this new advanced economy. We need, talent to come out of our universities regionally. You may have universities within the region that you can partner with as a city to really connect with your employers so that they can make long-term commitments, 30, 60 years, and know that there's going to be talent coming. We also partner with our universities to start entrepreneurial programs like the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. But we have to think about ourselves as a partner in building the entrepreneurial and ecosystem for talent and talent development. The other role that we've found that we've been playing in this new emerging role of economic development is around transitions, economic transitions. The private sector oftentimes has to go where there's, the price is right. So we've seen in Long Beach losing some of our large historic aerospace manufacturers, but that isn't the end of the story. Ultimately, there's infrastructure there, whether it's around our airport or through our university training engineers. And we were able in the city to take on this new role of helping to reposition that talent and those tenants in those supply chains. And now, even though we lost, a Boeing C-17 production supply chain, we've now replaced that with 4 new aerospace, satellite, and rocket launch companies in advanced manufacturing using the same talent and infrastructure to transition into this new marketplace. The other thing is training. I think that oftentimes as cities, we forget that one of the absolute most important advantages we have as the state of California is we have our university system, we have our Cal State system. It's the most robust public education system in the world. So talent and training and upskilling. And so partnering with our workforce innovation boards, our workforce networks, many of them are independent of cities, but they're hungry, just like we partner with Pacific Gateway here in the city of Long Beach on really designing the talent training programs using federal funds and connecting them to employers. And these are opportunities for cities to serve as training partners in the workforce. And then another area that we've found that is emerging in the role of local government is the future of work. We have gig workers and on-demand workers. And so in our relationship with Pacific Gateway and through an innovative program called Work LB, we now have an online labor exchange to meet available hours in the workforce, the gig workers with the demand for that work, whether it's employers or individuals. And then, of course, communicating. We have totally transformed in a very simple and efficient way without any new staff or anything like that to be better communicators using online digital tools, social media, constant contact, daily and weekly emails to let people know about grants and resources that we aren't even providing as a city, but we're helping people to connect with at the state or federal level. And then visioning. So this is one of the biggest, as I kind of wrap up, the emerging role of local government in economic development is about providing an economic vision, taking our history, our data, our partners, where the market is moving, and providing a vision for the future. And that's a community-based process. We're in the middle of it right now. We're just wrapping up 24 community meetings, roundtables with different sectors about the economic recovery. But our blueprint for economic development has really provided a lot of inspiration for our policymakers and our staff and the community to know where the economy is going and how we intend to play a role in it. So at the end of the day, it comes down, the economy is about people. It's about connecting people and sharing your vision, sharing the opportunity. And so we have recently started a new nonprofit economic development corporation in the city of Long Beach called the Long Beach Economic Partnership. And we're now doing these quarterly Accelerate Long Beach events where we take the university data and we share that with the community. We get the best minds in the community to talk about what's happening in their sectors. So I want to invite you all to not only think about this new role of economic development and your role in it, but also come to Long Beach on March 18th, a virtual event. Join us for Accelerate Long Beach, and you'll get a sense of how we see the economy moving here, but also maybe get some ideas and connect with you about how we can work together. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for everything you're doing to collaborate and help us become stronger as a region. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you, John. And thank you to all our morning speakers. At this time, we will take a short break for everyone to grab some lunch, stretch legs, and/or join our sponsors in our virtual exhibit hall, as well as networking with each other. We'll be back shortly to begin our first panel.